say to me in Bowers Game Corner?
Hey there, YouTube. I'm back again for another How to Play video, and today I'm very excited to teach you how to play Invasion, the Conquest of Kings from Dimension Board Games. This is for 3 or 4 players, take about 2 hours to play, and it's for ages 12 plus. Now, I've got most of it set up, and the first thing you're going to need to do when you start the game is figure out how many players are playing. Each player is going to select a color, and then they're going to get all of their corresponding items for their color. That will include your castles, your soldiers, your roads, and then your 2 cards, one of which has buy values on it, and one of which has your army card, which will say King's Army on the back. Everyone is going to place 4 of their soldiers onto their King's Army card to start off the game. Set that off to the side where everyone can see it. Next, you're going to shuffle up all the tiles. And if you're playing a 3-player version of the game, then you're going to take out 1 of each of the 4 different types of tiles: stone, wood, gold, and crops. Set those into the box. If you're playing a full 4-player game, then you will use all of the tiles. Next, you're going to want to set out the stone, wood, gold, crop, and advantage cards off to the side where everyone can reach them. Next, you're going to set down the 2 blue play mats that come with the game. This is going to represent the ocean. Put this in the middle where everyone can reach it. Make sure all the dice are out, so you should have the blue and the black resource dice, and then a bunch of the red D6s. And make sure you have the 5 metal coins out and where everyone can reach them. But with that, you are ready to start the game. Place all the tiles you're playing with into the center of the ocean. And then the player who shuffled the tiles is going to grab the top tile and place it somewhere around the outside of the top tile, as long as you are still connected. And then you're going to go clockwise, because the game will always go clockwise, with each player doing that until all the tiles are spread out. So now the red player might put this one right here. Green would go next, and they would go here. And the big rule is the tiles need to stay on the mat. So let's speed it up until we get to the next phase, which is where you're going to now start placing your castles onto the board. And each player is going to place a grand total of 3 castles at the beginning of the game. Once again, starting with the first player, you're going to have a pretty typical roll-off to see who goes first. So everyone's going to roll the die, and you go until someone has the highest number, at which point they will be the first player. And when you place a castle, it's going to go in between 2 tiles or 1 tile and an ocean. You also need to make sure that you are at least 1 road away from another castle, and a road is defined as one side of a tile. So if orange decide to play their castle here, red could not go here, 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 or here, because they're not at least 1 road space away. So moving on to the red player, they might go here. The green player might decide they want to go up there. Now, the reason why you're doing this is because these are the resources that you are going to produce. So, for instance, with this castle, red is either going to be able to produce crops or gold, because those are the 2 they're touching. And when you're first laying castles out, you want to make sure you have access to all 4 resources. It's really important. So everyone's placed 1 castle. It goes back up to orange, who is going to place right over here. Now, if you decide to place on an ocean spot, this means that you're going to be able to have 1 additional action that you can take that other players cannot take unless they are next to an ocean, which is called the port, where you're going to be able to trade in 4 cards for 1 good card. And a player can do that as many times as they want. Now, I want to modify the board real quick to show you one very rare scenario that can happen, which could be this, where there's actually water inside of the play area, which is obviously not ocean, because ocean is on the outside. And in this very rare scenario, this would not get you that bonus that we talked about. You would have to go onto this side. You have to be connected to the ocean, not to just a lake. But fast forward until each player has their 3 castles set up, because now players are going to form their starting hands. The cards that you're going to get in your starting hand are whatever resources your castles are touching. So for instance, let's take a look at red right now. Red is going to get 2 wood from this castle right here. They'll get 1 crop and 1 gold from this castle right here. And then for this castle, they're only going to get 1 gold. So their starting hand is going to be 5 cards, whereas green up here, whose castle is touching 2 tiles for each castle, is going to start with 6 cards. With your starting resources in hand, last but not least, starting with the first player, you're going to place your king out onto the board, and you're going to place it onto one of the tiles that your castle is touching. Now, the king is going to not only represent the king, which will be a piece you're moving around the board, but also your King's Army card and however many soldiers you have on there plus 1. So right now, this king would have a power of 5 because there's 4 soldiers on my card and the 1 king themselves. So I think orange might place theirs right there. Now red, if they wanted to, could go to this same spot, and that would be safe because the first 2 rounds of the game, there's absolutely no combat at all. However, later in the game, doing this would mean that either the orange player or the red player could initiate combat if they wanted to. But for right now, it's fine. But now everything is set up and ready to start the game. So starting with the first player, they're going to roll the black and the blue resource dice. They're going to call out what they roll. So right now I would have 2 wood. Now what this means is that every person who has a castle on a wood spot is going to collect 2 wood for their castle. So right now, orange would be getting 2 wood from here, green would be getting 2 wood from here, and then red would actually be getting 4 wood, 2 from here, and 2 from here, and so all players would then put those resource cards into their hand, and there is no hand limit in this game. And just to clarify, if this was 1 wood and 1 stone, then everyone would be collecting 1 wood and 1 stone for each of those corresponding tiles they touch. So for instance, green would be getting 1 stone here, 1 stone here, and 1 wood here. Also, if it ever looks like you're about to run out of a resource from the resource piles set on the side, then you collect resources in clockwise order starting with the first player, and if you run out of resources, then tough cookies, someone's just not getting the resources. After you're done collecting resources though, it then moves into the main chunk of your turn, which is going to be you participating in a couple different actions, which are building things, moving around, engaging in combat, and negotiating. And the first main thing I want to tell you about all these things you can do is you can do them in whatever order you want. You could move and then build and then move again and then build again and then get into combat and then move another time, as long as you had the movement actions and the resources to build. But first, let's start off by talking about the build action. On your turn, you're going to be able to build one of the 5 things listed on your buy values card right here. And you can buy any number of these. So you could buy 10 roads in your turn if you had the room to place the roads and if you had all the resource cards to purchase them. Now, how roads work are, you pay the cost, which in this case is a wood and a stone, and then you can place a road anywhere on the board as long as it is connected to either one of your castles or one of your roads. So let's just pretend that orange is going to go right here and place that road there. They'd pay their cost, and then they'd move on to whatever next they want to do. Now, this road is going to help them move fast around the board, which I'll show you during the movement phase. And it's also going to block anyone else from building a road here. So green could not come up here and build their own road next to it later on. Also, if for whatever reason a road ever just becomes abandoned because a castle gets destroyed, then that road disappears. So let's say that someone destroyed this castle, well then this road would now, poof, be gone as well. But that's not the case, so we'll put that back. Next, we're going to talk about purchasing castles, which is going to cost you 2 wood and 3 stone. And when placing a castle, it must be connected to one of your roads, and it must be at least 1 road away from any castle. So for instance, if orange spent the resources, they could place this right there, and that would be totally legal. They could not, however, place it right here because there's no road that they own connected to it. The next thing you can buy is a soldier, and this will cost you 1 crop and 1 gold. And you can either spawn soldiers next to a castle, or you can spawn them onto a soldier's army card as long as your king is next to a castle. So let's just pretend that orange wants to bolster right here, so they might spawn 1 soldier right here, and then 1 soldier onto their army card to strengthen up their army, and both of those would be legal as long as they paid the cost for 2 soldiers. Next, you can spawn a king, and this is going to cost you 2 crops and 3 golds. However, there's only 1 king that you're allowed to have on the board at a time, so this is only going to be applicable once your king dies, which we'll talk about once we get to combat. However, when you respawn a king, it's going to be placed on a land tile that's next to one of your castles. And when you respawn your king, it doesn't start with any soldiers on the card. It's just the king by themselves. Last but not least, you can also purchase an advantage cards, which are these cards right here. These are 7 different cards that will have a variety of special abilities on them. And this is going to cost you 1 of each of the resource cards, a crop, a gold, a wood, and a stone. You can buy as many of those as you want on your turn. And once you purchase them, you can use them immediately if you'd like. And you can even stack them on top of each other. So for instance, if you had one that said add +2 to a roll and you had 2 of those, you could add +4 to your roll. And if you want more info on all the different advantages, they're on the back of the rule booklet right here. Now there's one last rule that we need to talk about when you're buying things on your turn, but I'm going to talk about that in a minute when I talk about blocking. So that is building. Now let's talk about movement and how that works. Movement is really quite simple. There's only two main things you have to remember. If you're moving a soldier, they get one movement action. If you're moving a king along with the soldiers on your card, you get two movement actions. Now, what is a movement action? It is to move one tile away from you or to take a road. So let's progress the game a little bit, and let's say that orange has built this road right here. So this one singular soldier would normally only have one movement. However, since they have a road, this soldier could now move anywhere along this road, which is why building roads is so important. And just to clarify, you cannot move along any of your opponent's roads unless you have permission from them to do it. And that's pretty much it, except for one big aspect, which is called blocking. And blocking is done by having at least 3 soldiers or a king's army on a land tile. This prevents enemies from sieging, moving, or building. So let's actually show you how that works. So let's pretend that the red king is right here, and let's rewind a little bit. So now this soldier's movement has been blocked because both sides of the road are blocked. Now, obviously, this is an ocean tile, which means it's just naturally blocked. You can't go through it. However, this tile has the red king on it, which means it's now blocked from the other side. And once again, this would be just as good as well if they had 3 soldiers right here. This would also block this space, which means now orange might have to consider negotiating in order to get from point A to point B. But the main rule to remember with movement blocking is both sides of the road have to be blocked. So let's reposition here a little bit and say that this is what our board looked like. None of this would be blocked because nothing over here is blocking it, which means orange could just go boom like that if they really wanted to. The same rule also applies when you're buying things. So for instance, if the red king was right here and the red had 3 soldiers right here, orange could not put a road or a castle here. Blocking also applies when you're having sieges on people, but we're going to talk about that more when we get to the sieges. And yes, if you kill enough units in a particular area, you can clear a block and then use that block this turn. So let's pretend that my king came over here and killed this one red soldier. Now, orange would be able to purchase a road here or a castle if they'd like. But now with movement out of the way, let's talk about combat. So the first thing you need to know about combat, as I mentioned earlier, is you can't do it in the first 2 rounds of the game. The next big rule to remember is that initiating combat is optional. So right now on the orange player's turn, let's assume it's at the very beginning of the turn. Orange has the choice on whether or not they want to try and fight these 2 units right here. Likewise, if my one soldier was right here with the red's king's army, I could potentially fight, even though it's probably going to be a poor choice. And just like everything else in the game, I can do this combat whenever I want. I could do it at the beginning of my turn, or I could do it towards the end of my turn. The flow of the turns is very freeform. But now let's talk about combat and how that works. And that's where you're going to use these red dice right here. So how it works is you're going to roll the same number of dice as soldiers you have. So let's take a look at this one right here. Since I have 5 soldiers on my army card, that now means that I'm going to get to roll 6 dice. 1 for each of the soldiers, and then 1 for my king right here. So I would roll these 6 dice, while my opponent would only get to roll 2 dice, 1 for each of the soldiers they have here. So we're going to roll at the same time, and if you're in a king's army, a 5 or a 6 will kill an opponent. However, if you're just a soldier, you have to get a 6. So let's just pretend this is what we rolled right here. Orange would kill both of the red army, which means they would go back into that player's pile. However, red did get 1 6, which means we would then take 1 soldier off of my army card. So they have dealt damage to me. And that's all the combat that's going to happen this round. So let's actually reverse that a little bit, and let's pretend that orange had not killed that final soldier. In this scenario, that soldier is safe from orange right now because there's only 1 single round of combat per conflict. However, what orange could do is they could then have another conflict, but in a different location. Because once you have combat in a specific location, that essentially closes down that location from you adding any more characters to it until the next turn. But let's head over here to this one where we have a single orange soldier and then our red army. But we're going to change things up and we're going to pretend that red has been taking a beating, and in fact they have no more soldiers on their card. That then means that their king's army mini has a strength of 1, because you always have a strength of 1. However, you add to that the number of soldiers you have. And in this instance, this would actually be a pretty awesome move for orange, because it's just going to come down to a single die roll right now. 1 orange versus 1 red. Now, the King's army still has the advantage of getting 5s or 6s to get a kill. However, Orange sees this as an opportunity because how you win the game is by killing your opponent's kings. And if you're ever able to kill a king, you're going to get one of these golden coins. And if you get 2 of these golden coins, then you immediately win the game. And on the off chance that you kill each other at the same time, let's pretend that 2 kings kill each other at the same time and then both players now have 2 coins, then you go to a 3rd coin. You continue the game as normal. So let's pretend in this scenario, Orange got a 6 and Red got a 5. That would mean both of them would be dead. However, for Orange, they would then get a gold coin and be 1 step closer to winning the entire game. For Red, their king would go back into their pile and they would have to rebuild it later. But now I want to fast forward to the Red player's turn, because Red's in a really interesting position right here, because this little straggler survived. So during your turn, if you start with opponents on your space, you have a couple options. As I mentioned, you can either fight them, or you can do what's called retreating. And retreating just means that you move away. And so that's your movement for this particular character. So right now, I might move right there. And then this soldier, since they only have 1 movement action, would be done for the entire turn. They would be right there. Likewise, if I had a series of roads next to the battle, I could use the roads and get much further away as long as I only spent 1 movement action. However, by doing this, this has allowed my castle to be open to attack from the Orange player right here in what's called a siege, but we'll talk about that in a second. So let's rewind real quick, and let's pretend that the next player's turn was not, in fact, red, but it was green, because what can happen is that you can have battles with more than 2 people in them. So let's pretend green was right here. So they get their 2 movement action. They decide, you know what? I want to join this conflict. They can get on up in there. Now, when this happens, the green player is going to announce how many dice they are attacking each of the units with. So our green army has a grand total of 5 dice that we're going to be rolling. So we might say, all right, we're going to spend 1 die on the red soldier, and then we're going to spend 4 dice to try and defeat the orange army. Or you could potentially even just ignore that soldier there and say, you know what, I'm just here for the coin. I'm going straight after the orange army. The one thing to remember in this situation is, though, that you are going to get attacked by both red and orange. So in this particular scenario right here, green is going to roll 5 dice against orange. Our orange is currently at a total of 5 strength, which means they are also going to be rolling 5 dice to attack green. And then red, even though they're just sitting off to the side not getting attacked, are still also going to attack green with their 1 die. The important thing to note is this is not an opportunity for the other players to attack each other. They will both be attacking the 3rd party or the 4th party that decides to enter on their turn. So orange could not roll any of their 5 dice to try and take out red, and vice versa. And in the wild and crazy scenario where you happen to get 4 different colors in an area, the attacker rolls first, and then the defender rolls, and then the other players do their combat rolls in turn order. So that's ground combat. But now let's talk about sieging. We talked a little bit about it earlier. So a siege is when you attempt to capture or destroy another player's castle. And the first thing you need to know about a siege is that you have to bring at least 3 soldiers or your king's army in order to do it. So this one guy right here could not start a siege over here at orange. They're just not powerful enough. However, in the scenario that red had respawned their king, they could, even though they would only have a strength of 1, however, they could legally do that, though, because they have their king's army. However, that would put their king's army very, very susceptible to being attacked. So, illegal, totally legal, even though they don't have anybody with them. The only other thing to remember is that a blocked land tile with a castle on it cannot be sieged. However, when you do get down to sieging, it's really quite simple. You're going to roll 2 red d6 die and try and get a 7 or higher. And if you get a 7 or higher, then the castle is going to go on its side, which means the defending player, so in this case the green player, would have 1 turn to move onto that land tile and initiate a battle with the attacker. If they do not do that, then on the next turn, that would mean that it would either turn into a red castle if red had the castles to do that, or it would just get destroyed if red already had all their castles out on the board. Likewise, if when you're rolling the 2 dice you ever happen to get a 12, then you immediately take over or destroy the castle. But we're going to pretend that green is not going to let that happen. So red has successfully sieged the castle. Let's pretend they rolled an 8, and then it would get back to the green player's turn, and they decide, you know what, we're going to move over there. So if they have the movement actions, they can go over there, and they can initiate combat. So if a battle is engaged by the defender of the castle, then you're going to have a normal round of conflict. However, this is much more high stakes because as soon as either of the players completely die or they retreat, the castle then goes to whoever's left standing there. So let's pretend green came back, they did a bunch of damage to red, then it gets to red player's turn, they say, you know what, I'm out, I'm retreating, I'm moving my 2 actions. Well, now this gets flipped back up and green has successfully defended their castle, and vice versa. If green were to run away and retreat, or if they died, then it would then be the red's castle. And one thing that's important to note is even if your castle is getting sieged, when it gets to the green player's turn, you still collect resources for the castle as per normal during the resource die rolling phase. And no, if a castle is being sieged, you cannot sneak up to the other side of the castle and siege. You have to get in there and you're going to have to fight. So building, movement, combat, the only thing we haven't talked about is negotiation. And on your turn, you can trade resource cards, you can trade advantage cards, you can negotiate about ending combat or forming an alliance or defending a siege or road passage. However, you cannot trade castles and you cannot trade kings. And these negotiations are only binding during the turn that they are announced. So let's say you make a negotiation, you say, I'm not going to attack you for the next 2 turns, and they agree and they give you a bunch of cards. Well, next turn you could turn around and you could attack them. Just don't expect them to negotiate much more with you then. Anywho, when a player's done with their turn, they pass the dice to the next player on the left and they continue, and you're going to do that until someone has earned 2 of the king-killing coins, at which point they will be the winner of Invasion, the Conquest of Kings. If this helped you out, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Also consider subscribing as I teach new games all the time. And thanks for your time, YouTube.